On September 18th of 1970, Jimi Hendrix was found dead at the Samarkand Hotel in Notting Hill, England. He was only 27 years old. Hey everybody, what's up and welcome back. If you're new here, I'm Liz, and today we're going to be discussing the death of Jimi Hendrix. This video has taken me a few days to film, mainly due to the fact that I am getting over being sick. If I sound nasally, if I sound a little congested, that is why. But if you're new here, hey, I talk about some true crime. Right now I'm talking about the 27 Club in my month of famous people that have died for the month of May. And the 27 Club this week has been about Kristen Pfaff, Kurt Cobain, Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix for this video. I do have one about Jim Morrison that will be coming up as well. And I do plan on reconvening the 27 Club later on in the year for more coverage of that club so people understand who is a part of it and why. But Jimi Hendrix, he's a tough one for me to cover because my younger brother was originally named because of him. His birth mother nicknamed him Jimmy, like J-I-M-I, like Jimi Hendrix's name, because she was like in love with him. I don't know. It's his egg donor. It's the details of Jimi Hendrix's last day, like full day and death, are severely unclear and very widely disputed, which is said about a lot of these celebrities we're covering. He spent much of September 17th in London with Monica Dannemann, which she's I don't even know this woman. I don't even know. This is lovely. Isn't she lovely? So he woke late that morning at her apartment at the Samarkand Hotel. By around 2 p.m., they were sitting outside, they were having tea. There's a very famous picture of him with Black Beauty, which is his Stratocaster. He's sitting with it, and he's kind of like, he has the neck right here, and they're having tea. Like, clearly you can tell they're having tea. And it's one of the last photographs of him alive. In this picture, he does not look very healthy, which is the opinion of an author, Tony Brown. He doesn't look healthy at all. His face is puffy, and in a few of the pictures, he doesn't even try to attempt a smile. Anywho, so by around 3 p.m., according to Monica, they left the apartment because they needed to go to a bank. They needed more money so they could fuel more of their addiction. So apparently also they went on to the Kensington Market, which is like an open marketplace. He went on to sign on some autographs for some young boys. He purchased a new leather jacket and ordered some shoes. He briefly also spoke with his ex-girlfriend Kathy Etchingham, and invited her to visit him at their hotel that evening at around 8 p.m. So, okay, she declined the invitation because she had prior engagements. Later, she admitted that she regretted not going to see him ever since because maybe she could have deterred him from taking his final hit. But, okay, so after this, him and Monica, they then go to the Chelsea Antiques Market where he purchases more clothing. They end up making another stop to buy paper for him to write, which he also used to compose his final lyrics that he ever wrote. Monica then asked, like after they got into the car, they asked the car to stop so he can get out and walk and talk with Wilson. Monica apparently was jealous, and she gave Devin Wilson a very disgusting look. But later they invited Philip Harvey to tea, or they were invited to have tea with Philip Harvey, in which they accepted. And prior to going to Philip Harvey's, they ended up going to the Cumberland Hotel, which is where Jimmy's suite was. So while they were at the hotel, he made several different phone calls. Monica said that he phoned his lawyer, Henry Steingarten, and asked for a way for him to find a way out of his contract with his manager Mike Jeffrey and his producer Eddie Kramer. And Jimmy ended up leaving a voice message for him. So he left a message for his lawyer. Now, Mitch Mitchell said that he called Jimi at the Cumberland Hotel on the 17th after having been asked to do so by their tour manager, Jerry Stickles, who had just spoken to Jimi several minutes earlier. And apparently during this phone conversation he had with Jimi, he then agreed to join him around midnight at the Speakeasy Club for a previously arranged session that they wanted to have, which included Sly Stone. So after they stopped at the Cumberland, this is when him and Monica then go with Harvey to his apartment. This is around 5:30, and apparently they smoked, they drank tea and they drank some wine, some red wine, and apparently there was 2 female companions that were discussing their careers that were already there with Philip Harvey. At around 10 p.m., this is when Monica feels like she's out of the conversation. She doesn't feel welcome, and she's very jealous of the attention that Jimi's having. Well, she becomes upset, and she storms out of the flat. Jimi then follows her. They have an argument of which apparently she calls him, "You fucking pig." And then Philip Harvey is concerned with their yelling and doesn't want them to draw unwanted attention by the police, asks them to quiet down. Apparently, Philip, who remained silent during this incident, except for telling them to quiet down, apparently he was really concerned for Jimi's safety and worried that Monica might resort to serious physical violence, which, why wasn't any of this investigated is my thing. Wow, that's really heavy. But whatever. According to Philip, Monica verbally assaulted Jimi in the most offensive way possible, and approximately about 30 minutes later, this is when Jimi comes back into the apartment. He apologizes for the outburst, and then he leaves with Monica at 10:40. This is the last time Philip Harvey ever saw him alive. So Monica said that she then prepared them a meal at around 11 p.m. They shared a bottle of red wine, and sometime after returning to the apartment, this is when Jimi took a bath and he started writing a poem called Story of Life. Approximately 1:45 a.m. on September 18th, Monica drove Jimi to a party that Devin Wilson had invited him to earlier that day, which was hosted by Jimi's friend Pete Cameron. Now at the party, apparently Jimi complained about his business problems, and he ate some food, took at least 1 amphetamine, and about 30 minutes later, so at about 2:15, this is when Monica rang the intercom asking for Jimi. Now Stella Douglas, who was there, asked Monica to return later, which obviously this probably pissed her off. And according to Angie Burden, who was the estranged wife of Eric Burden of the Animals, Monica came back around 15 minutes later, and then Stella used a very assertive voice with her and told her that she was being impolite. Now, Monica didn't care. She demanded to speak to Jimi, and then this is when Angie Burden said that Jimi got so angry because Monica wouldn't leave him alone. So according to Angie as well, other guests at the party started to shout at the windows out at Monica, asking her to leave, and eventually Jimi just gave up, spoke to Monica before he unexpectedly left at 3 a.m. So he got tired of her shit, and other people were trying to stick up for him, but he was fed up with it, and he just gave in to her, which is sad, very sad. Now, Monica is the only eyewitness in his last few hours of life. Sometime around 3 a.m., she then made tuna fish sandwiches for them after arriving back at her basement apartment. Now, at around 4 a.m., apparently Jimi couldn't sleep, so he asked her for some of her sleeping meds. She said that she refused and hoped that he would just fall asleep naturally. Monica said that she took her own sleeping pill to help her sleep at around 6 a.m. And this is while he was still awake. Now, apparently, she woke sometime between 10 and 10:20. She found him sleeping normally in bed. She then left to buy some cigarettes, and when she returned at 11, she found him in bed breathing, but he was unconscious and unresponsive. She then called for an ambulance at 11:18. They arrived at 11:27. Now, when they arrived, they found the door wide open and Monica was nowhere to be found. The curtains were drawn and the apartment was dark. They called out several times, but nobody answered. When they entered, this is when they found Jimi on the bed alone. Monica, again, was nowhere to be found. And according to Reg Jones, which was one of the people that was there, they had to get the police, and there was only Jimi in the flat. So when John Sawa, which is the other person that was with him, ran up and radioed and said it was horrific. Jimi was covered in his own vomit. There was tons of it all over the pillow, black and brown. It was everywhere. His airway apparently was completely blocked all the way down with his own vomit. He had a pulse, but it was very light. They did show a light in his eyes, which you normally do to check if there was response, but there was no response at all. And around 11:30, this is when police officers Ian Smith and Tom Keene respond to a call for officer assistance. And when Reg Jones comments on them calling, and when the police arrives, he said once the police arrived, which seems like no time at all, they got Jimi to the hospital as quick as they could. So they left the hotel at 11:35. They got there at 11:27, so that's not a very long time to be there. And they took him to St. Mary Abbott's Hospital, and they arrived at 11:45. So, I mean, if he's unresponsive for that amount of time, he's obviously dead. The medical registrar, Martin Seifert, said that Jimi was rushed in to be resuscitated. He was put on a monitor, which is an ECG, but it was flat. He pounded on his heart a couple of times, gave him CPR to make sure that they could try to resuscitate him, but nothing was happening. There was no point because he was dead. He was blue, he was cold, there was nothing. They did all the parameters they could to resuscitate him, but he had been dead for some time, and he was just left there. They worked on him for about a half an hour without any response at all. He was pronounced dead at 12:45 p.m. on September 18th. So, September 18th, 1970, he passed away at the age of 27. When they talked to the hospital staff, one of them said he obviously was already dead. There was no pulse, there was no heartbeat, and the attempt to resuscitate him was just a formality because you have to do that in order to pronounce him dead. It's so saddening to hear that a woman that was so desperate to have him with her just fled, just left. It's so saddening and disgusting. Like, why would you do that? Why? Now, at first they presumed that it was a suicide because they found his lyrics near him and they thought it was a suicide note, but clearly it's not. He, was just writing the story of life. That was his last poem he wrote. And they finally got to speak with Monica on the 19th, but she spoke with a journalist, and she said, I loved him and Jimi loved me. We were already engaged. She designed the sleeves for his records, but he couldn't sleep, so I gave him tablets, which is funny because she first said that she never gave him tablets to sleep. And on September 20th, her brother, Klaus Peter, was then interviewed, and he said that Monica phoned me on the 19th and told me that Jimi took 9 sleeping tablets. She said that Jimi told her he wanted to sleep for about a day and a half before he went back to the U.S., and she told me that he did not intend to kill himself. Funny, because the statement you gave completely contradicts this. Completely. So his cause of death, which was stated by Gavin Thurston, which was given obviously after they did a full autopsy of his body on the 21st of September. And now Robert Donald Terr is the one that gave the report that said that Jimi was very well nourished and he was very muscular. He did identify a scar on his left wrist, but that was basically the only scar on his body. There was no sign of IV use for drug addiction. Once those marks are on your skin, they're always there. So if he used IV use, then it would be there. He also said that the right side of his heart was extremely dilated, like widely dilated, but there was no sign of valvular heart disease. He also discovered that he had a partially collapsed left lung. There was 400 milliliters of liquid in his chest. Both of his lungs were congested, and there was vomit found in the bronchi of his lungs, like the smaller bronchi, not the big ones. So the lower part of your lungs. Now, according to him as well, his stomach content contained a medium-sized, partially digested meal in which he could tell that rice was a part of it. He also said that his kidneys were very healthy. His liver was his liver was congested. He stated that Jimmy's blood alcohol content was 100 milligrams per 100 milliliters, so it would have been enough to fill a breathalyzer, and that was about the equivalent of 4 pints of beer. He also said that when he looked at his blood, he determined that there was a mixture of barbiturates and Vesparax. Vesparax was the sleeping medication that Monica was using. And he estimated that the drug concentration in his blood was about 1.8 grams of barbiturates and 20 milligrams of amphetamine and 20 milligrams of cannabis, which we already talked about that he did smoke when he was at his friend's. So the ultimate cause of death was inhalation of vomit due to a barbiturate intoxication. He did not attempt to determine his time of death, but it is clear that he died on the morning of September 18th. It is clear. So on the 23rd, there was an inquest into his death, but he ended up concluding that on the 28th, saying that Hendrix did aspirate on his own vomit and died of asphyxia while intoxicated on barbiturates. He cited that there was insufficient evidence of circumstances and that his death clearly was an inhalation, and that there's no evidence to have an intent of suicide attempt. And that if there was a question of any intent at the time, that it couldn't be answered because there was no indication that he would have committed suicide. So Monica would later state again that Jimmy took 9 of her tablets, and all of these are intended to be half doses, not full doses, so half of a pill, and that 9 of the tablets of this would have been such a powerful sedative, and it's about 18 times the recommended amount. So his body ended up being embalmed by Desmond Haley, and it was flown back to Seattle on the 29th of September. There was a service at the Dunlap Baptist Church on October 1st, and he was then interred at the Greenwood Cemetery in Renton, Washington, and he's buried near his mother. His friends and family traveled in about 24 limousines, and more than 200 people attended his funeral, including very notable people of like the original Jimi Hendrix Experience members, Mitch Mitchell and Noel Redding, as well as Miles Davis, John Hammond, and Johnny Winter. So his death is very, very suspicious because we don't know what happened. We know that he died due to inhalation or asphyxia due to vomit being in his airway and due to a barbiturate overdose. But what we don't know is why and how. Monica gave very differing reports as to what happened, but what actually happened, we will never know. So that, my friends, is the death of Jimi Hendrix. Let me know what you think happened in the comments down below. I think she's the one that forced him down his throat and she watched him OD. I believe that she watched him try to vomit everything up like you would do during an overdose. Especially if you have food in your system, you're going to throw it up. I think that she watched him die and that she fled the scene because she saw it. And obviously, there's other indications that say that he had already died before he went to the hospital, because his bladder and the orifice of your body generally give out when you die, and anything that's in your body comes out. So his rectum, his sphincter in his anal cavity gave out and his bladder gave out. And he peed himself and there was a defecation. Like, everything that your body has in it will expel once you are deceased. So it was a clear indication that he had already died, but in order to pronounce you dead, you do have to perform CPR and try to resuscitate. So that, my friends, is the death of Jimi Hendrix. Again, let me know what you think in the comments down below. I would love to hear, and I will see you guys in another video.